All right. Artificial intelligence and automated decision-making. Basically, it all boils down to algorithms. These complicated sets of digital rules have come to govern whole portions of our day-to-day lives, or at least have taken over all the tech policy conversations I've had over the last year. And so to sort of talk about the issue of algorithms, I'm joined by Natasha Duarte, who's a policy analyst at CDT, and she also runs our Digital Decisions project. So, Natasha, algorithms, 2017, what happened?
Yeah, so I think you nailed it. We've been talking about algorithms, AI, machine learning in the tech policy community for some time, but this was really the year that policymakers started to pay attention to how AI and automated decision-making systems are being used, both in the public and private sector, with mixed results. So on the one hand, we saw a lot of lack of education in how policymakers understand what this technology can do. So when it comes to social media platforms, we saw, in part because of potential Russian interference in political ads and things like the need to monitor for hate speech and terrorist propaganda, all of the ways that people are worried about social media being manipulated or used for malicious ends. We saw some policymakers reacting to that in ways that show that they don't totally understand what's possible with algorithms. So, for example, in the UK, Prime Minister Theresa May has called for the 2-hour rule, so saying that social media operators should be able to identify terrorist content and remove it within 2 hours of it being posted. And so to do something like that would require relying on automated takedowns and identifying content that way with algorithms and automation is just, not really, it's fiction for now.
Okay.
But then on the other hand, we saw some genuine efforts to engage and understand how this technology works and to look at specifically how it's being used by governments in the public sector and what governments need to understand to be able to evaluate the technology and make sure that it's fair and that it works well for everyone and doesn't sideline certain groups.
Well, so what's a fair algorithm?
That's a complicated question. So one way of thinking about it is, increasingly important decisions that affect people's lives are being made based on insights from data that are intuited from machines. And this is happening in contexts like criminal justice, in the distribution of government benefits, things like child welfare programs and placing children in foster care, in medicine. And so we want to make sure that whatever insights and assumptions machines are using to make decisions work equally well for everyone. And one reason they might not is that certain groups are underrepresented in data. So groups that are underrepresented generally, racial minorities in the U.S. and sometimes women and other groups are not as well represented in the data as, for example, white men might be. And so the insights that are learned from that data might also not represent them. So, for example, when it comes to medical studies and medical trials, there's a history of minority groups not being well represented in those trials. And so if those insights, if that data is then used by algorithms to make predictions, medical predictions, those predictions then might not be as good for those underrepresented minorities. And so increasingly, we risk leaving them behind.
So what can lawmakers do? What should lawmakers do? And what are they going to do in 2018?
Yeah, so one model is the bill that was passed by New York City last week, which creates a temporary task force to look into and create a report about how the city of New York is using automated decision-making systems to make decisions that affect individuals, to look at how we should be evaluating those systems for potential disparate impacts for certain groups, how we should be measuring those disparate impacts, and the feasibility of providing people with an explanation of why a decision or prediction or classification was made that affected them, and an opportunity to appeal if they think the decision was wrong, the machine made a mistake. And so this is important because when automated systems are used by the government, they are basically policy, they're public policy. And so they need to reflect good policy, and they need to be non-discriminatory. And so we're not necessarily at a place where we know exactly what government should be doing about this, like how what kind of regulation will work and be effective. And so to have an exploratory commission like this, a task force, is a really useful way of looking into that. And I think they will hopefully uncover important insights about how automation and data are actually being used by the city, because it can be hard for us to have that information to even know what problems we need to fix.
Thanks. New York, let's get cracking.
Yeah.